notions of repressed sex is not therefore the notion of repressed sex is not therefore only a theoretical matter, the affirmation of a sexuality that has never been more rigorously subjugated than during the age of the hypocritical, bustling, and responsible bourgeoisie, is coupled with the grandiloquence of a discourse purporting to reveal the truth about sex, modify its economy within reality, subvert the law that governs it, and change its future. The statement of oppression and the form of the sermon refer back to one another. They are mutually reinforcing. To say that sex is not repressed, or rather that the relationship between sex and power is not characterized by repression, is to risk falling into a sterile paradox. It not only runs counter to a well-accepted argument, it goes against the whole economy and all the discursive interests that lie underneath this argument. This is the point at which I would like to situate the series of historical analyses that will follow the present volume of historical analysis that will follow the present volume, being at the same time an introduction and a first attempt at an overview. It surveys a few historical significant points and outlines certain theoretical problems. Briefly, my aim is to examine the case of a society which has been loudly castigating itself for its hypocrisy for many more than a century, which speaks verbosely of its own silence, takes great pains to relate its detail, the things it does not say, denounces the powers it exercises, and promises to liberate itself from the very laws that had made it function. I would like to explore not only these discourses, but also that will that sustains them and the strategic intention that supports them. The question I would rather like to pose is not why are we repressed, but rather why do we say with so much passion and so much resentment against our most recent past, against our present, and against ourselves that we are repressed? But why, by what spiral did we come to affirm that sex is negated? What led us to show ostensibly sex is something we hide, to say it is something we silence, and we do all this by formulating the matter in the most explicit terms, by trying to reveal it in its most naked reality, by affirming it in the positivity of its power and its effects. It is certainly legitimate to ask why sex was associated with this scene for such a long time, although you would remain to be discovered how this association was formed, and one would have to be careful not to state in summary and hasty fashion that sex was condemned. But we must also ask why we burden ourselves today with so much guilt for having once made sex a sin. What paths have brought us to this point, where we are all at fault with respect to our own sex? And how have we come to be a civilization so peculiar as to tell itself that through an abuse of power which has not ended, it has long sinned against sex? How does one account for the displacement which claiming to free us from the sinful nature of sex taxes us with a great historical wrong, which consists precisely in imagining that nature to be blameworthy and enjoying disastrous consequences from that belief. It will be said that if so many people today affirm this repression, the reason is that it is historical evident. And if they speak of it so abundantly as they have for such a long time now, this is because repression is so firmly anchored, having solid roots and reasons, and weighs so heavily on sex that more than one denunciation will be required in order to free ourselves from it. The job will be a long one, all the longer, no doubt, as it is the nature of power, particularly that kind of power that operates in our society, to be repressive, and to be especially careful in repressing useless energies, the intensities of pleasure, and irregular modes of behavior. We must not be surprised, then, if the effects of liberation vis-a-vis this repressive power are so slow to manifest themselves. The effort to speak freely about sex and accept it in its reality is so alien to a historical sequence that has gone unbroken for 1,000 years now, and so inimical in the intrinsic mechanisms of power that it is bound to make very little headway for a long time, succeeding in its mission.
One can raise very serious doubts concerning what I shall term the repressive hypothesis.
First out, it's sexual repression truly an established historical fact? It's what first comes into view and consequently permits one to advance in initial hypotheses, really the accentuation or even the establishment of a regime of sexual repression beginning in the 17th century. This is a properly historical question, second out to the workings of power, and in particular those mechanisms that are brought into play in societies such as ours really belong primarily to the category of repression or prohibition, censorship, and denial, truly the forms through which power is exercised in a general way. If not,
the every society knows certainly in our own. This is a historical theoretical question.
A third and final doubt. Did the critical discourse that addresses itself to repression come to act as a roadblock to a power mechanism that had operated unchallenged to that point? Or is it not, fact, part of the same historical network as the thing it denounced and doubtless misrepresents by calling it repression? Was there really a historical rupture between the age of repression and the critical analysis of repression?
The critical analysis of repression.
This is a historical political question. My introducing these three doubts is not merely to construct it. Where did it go? Construct counter arguments that are symmetrical, contrary to those outlined above. It is not a matter of saying that sexuality far from being far from me. Look at me. far from being repressed. In capitalist bourgeois society, as on the contrary,
benefit from a regime of unchanging liberty.
If it's a matter of saying that power in societies such as ours is more tolerant than repressive, that's the critique of repression. While it may give itself sense of rapture with the mass, are actually forms part of a much older process. And depending on how one chooses to understand this process, baby will appear either as a new episode in the lessening of prohibition, or as a more devious and discreet form of power. The doubts I would like to oppose to the repressive hypothesis are aimed less at showing it to be mistaken than at putting it back within a general economy of discourses on sex in modern societies. Since the 17th century, why has sexuality been so widely discussed, and what has been said about it?
What were the effects of power generated by what was it? What are the links between these
These effects of power and the pleasures that were invested by them, what knowledge, Savior, was formed as a result of this linkage. The object, in short, is to define the regime of power, knowledge, pleasure that sustains the discourse on human sexuality in our part of the world. The central issue that, at least in the first instance, is not to determine whether one says yes and no to sex, whether one formulates prohibitions or permissions, whether one accepts its importance or denies its effects, or whether one finds the word one uses to designate it, but to account for the fact that it is spoken about, to discover who does the speaking, the positions, their viewpoints from which they speak, the institutions which prompt people to speak about it, which don't distribute the things that are said.
What is the issue? Briefly, it is overall discoursing fact. That way in which sex is put in the discourse and suit. My main concerns will be to locate the forms of power, the channels it takes, and the discourses it permeates, in order to reach the most innocent and individual modern of behavior.
The past. The past that given access to the rare or scarcely perceivable forms of desire. How it penetrates and controls everyday pleasure. All the entailing effects that may be those of refusal, blockage, and invalidation. But also incitement and intensification. In short, the polymorphous techniques of power. And finally, the essential aim will not be to determine whether the discursive production and these effects of power lead one to formulate the truth about sex, or on the contrary, falsehoods designed to conceal that truth, but rather to bring about the wheel of knowledge that serves as both as part and instrument misunderstanding. I do not claim that sex has not been prohibited, or barred, or masked, or misapprehended since the classical age.
Nor do I mean assert that he has suffered this thing and any less from that period on that he has suffered this thing and any less from that period on that before. I do not maintain that the prohibition of sex is a
ruse. But it is a ruse to make prohibitions into the basic and constructive element from which one would be able to write the history of what has been said concerning sex, starting from the modern epoch. All these negative elements, defenses, censorship, denials, which the oppressive hypothesis groups together in one great central mechanism, destined to say no, are doubtless only components, parts that have a local and tactical role to play in a transformation into discourse, a technology of power, and a will to knowledge that are far from being reducible to the former.
In short, I would like to disengage my analysis from the privilege generally accorded for the economy of scarcity and the principles of clarification to certain instead, for instances of discursive position which also administers silence.
To be sure of the production of power, we sometimes have the function of prohibiting of the propagation of knowledge, the function of prohibiting which often causes mistaken belief or systematic microconception.
To circulate, I would like to write the history of those instances under transformation efforts are being made. First survey made from these viewpoints seems to indicate the worst is the end of the 16th century. The putting into this course of sex, far from undergoing a process of restriction of the contrary has been
Where are we? Where?
Of increasing incitement.
Increasing incitement that the techniques of power exercised over sex have not obeyed a principle of rigorous selection, but rather one of dissemination and implantation of polymorphous sexualities, and that the will to knowledge has not come to a halt in the face of a taboo that we must not be lifted, but has persisted in constituting, despite many mistakes, of course, a science of sexuality. It is these movements that I will now attempt to bring into focus in a schematic way, bypassing, as it were, the repressive hypotheses and the facts of interdiction or exclusion. It invokes and starts looking from certain historical facts that serve as guidelines for research. 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 What's the next one? Can we take a break? I want to go to the bathroom.
Okay.
What was that one?
What?
What was the... Should we tell the video what it was capturing or no?
Would that be against Foucault?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. That was mystery theater. Mystery Foucault.